We are good. Well, welcome everyone. Again, thank you so much for being here. We are so happy you could join us tonight for our webinar about assistive technology for students who are deaf, hard of hearing. My name is Vanessa Lombardo, and I am the director of the Assistive Technology Center at the College of New Jersey. The Assistive Technology Center at TCNJ is sponsored by the New Jersey Department of Ed, Office of Special Education, and we are partially funded by IDEA Part B. And through this funding, we are able to provide webinars like these for free. And we are very excited, like I said, to introduce our guests. Of course, the guests that we have, our hosts, our co-hosts, the statements issued by anyone does not reflect, of course, the opinions of the New Jersey Department of Ed, Office of Special Education Services. So please use your professional judgment, as always, when implementing any strategies or resources into your practice. So now that all of that is taken care of, I can officially welcome our wonderful presenters this evening. Dr. Andrea McMahon has dedicated the past 15 years to serving as an audiologist for the deaf and hard of hearing continuum on the Bergen County Special Services School District. Her experience spans working with children and young adults aged 3 to 21 within both special services specialized programs as an itinerant provider supporting students in their local school districts across northern New Jersey. She also serves as an adjunct instructor in the Department of Communication Science and Disorders at Montclair State University. Dr. McMahon earned her doctorate of science in audiology from Montclair University in 2010. So thank you so much for being here. And Dr. Bethany Long earned her doctorate in audiology from Montclair State University in 2023 with rotational experiences in hospitals, schools, and private practice care. She completed her fellowship at JFK Johnson Rehabilitation with a focus in pediatric care. Since graduation, she has worked for Bergen County Special Services School District, providing itinerant audiology services across 7 counties in New Jersey. So welcome to you both, and thank you so much for being here. I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. I was just scrolling through everyone's comments here. It looks like there's a lot of deaf ed teachers, some SLPs. Maybe I saw a parent or two scroll by as well. And lots of names I don't recognize. So hello, everyone from other parts of New Jersey. We tend to be more northern focused in the counties across the top of New Jersey, but I'm glad we've got people here probably from across the state. So Bethany and I are going to talk about assistive technology today for students who are deaf and hard of hearing. We thought first we'll start off with a little bit about why this is important, why we need to consider acoustics in our classrooms for students, and then, kind of moving over to the technology side of things, here are some of the choices available. And, when we get to the choices part of things, it is very much, I'm sure you guys have heard this phrase before. You've seen one kid with hearing loss, you've seen one kid with hearing loss. It's not something we can always generalize, what worked for one kid is going to work for the next 3 kids. So, we have a lot of options at our disposal, and we're always trying to personalize what, the specific needs are, and then fit the technology to that particular student. So you're going to see a lot of things today. Not everything we talk about is going to be appropriate for every learner. So choices, and then, we narrow down when we actually consult in person. So like I said, we're going to start a little bit, just a reminder about acoustics. If you've have been years out of school, just kind of getting back into that thought process. I don't think it's any surprise to anyone here. We spend the majority of our school days instructing our students in the auditory oral modality, unless you are working, in a deaf and hard of hearing program and you're doing sign or total communication. If anybody's in the mainstream, it's an auditory oral approach. So we're asking our students to do a lot of listening, and for our students with hearing loss, listening through an impaired auditory system. So just kind of thinking about how these issues kind of play out over the course of a child's academic career. Um, you know, if the classroom is hard to listen in, the student often is going to then struggle to understand what the teacher is saying. I think that makes sense. Um, and if they're not understanding what the teacher is saying, then they're not understanding the lesson, they're not getting the material. Then when it comes around to assessment time, either, teacher assessment, state assessment, what have you, they're going to struggle on those assessments and reaching grade level expectations. Um, and then I think we all have seen, examples where kids who struggle in school have trouble socially connecting with peers, either being teased or picked on for, not being as smart as everybody else in the class, or not really understanding the social cues because they don't hear what's going on necessarily. And all the other kids are laughing at a joke that the teacher made, and the student with hearing loss didn't really hear it or understand it. And they're kind of missing all that social, interaction and knowledge that everyone else is getting. So, we can kind of, I've called this sometimes the cascading effect of hearing loss. Like, it's not just the hearing that becomes it literally hearing the words, it's everything that comes after that then starts to build on itself, and just makes things more and more difficult over time. And if you miss those basic building blocks of education, kindergarten, first, second grade, it's really hard to start building this academic house when you're missing a solid foundation for all the skills we want them to develop when they're middle school, high school, adulthood. And we have studies showing that excessive noise in the classroom, poor listening environments, causes issues with reading comprehension. It has causes children have difficulty with attention, memory skills. And I think if you've been in a room where the kids are kind of loud, usually the behavior gets worse the louder the classroom gets, because they all start to yell over each other. And I feel like when they start yelling, they start acting silly, and it just kind of spirals out of control sometimes. So, like I said, it's not just academics that having difficulty hearing in the classroom is going to impact. It's, memory, it's social skills, it's behavior. There's a lot of things at play here, that could be negatively impacted by poor classroom acoustics or hearing poorly in the classroom. Let's see. There we go. Okay. So this slide is here. I kind of wanted to give a visual example of what it's like to be listening in a room that has good acoustics versus poor acoustics. I don't have a way to simulate here in my home office today, high reverberation and high noise and all of that. But if we look at the text on this slide, this is what I was talking about, that kind of cascading effect of hearing loss, where one thing kind of just starts causing problems down the line. So now going to this slide, like I said, kind of a visual example of what it's like to have good acoustics versus poor acoustics in a classroom. So when the acoustics are good and it's easy to hear the teacher, as in this example here, the text is nice and bold, it stands out from the background. We don't really have to struggle too much to read it. It says a good SNR makes it easier to understand speech anyways. SNR being signal to noise ratio. We're not going to go over that, but that's what it means. Then the line below it being much more difficult to read, where the text and the background are kind of the same color, they're bleeding into each other. And it's not that you can't read it. If I sit here and stare at it, I can see it says a poor SNR, makes it extremely difficult. But it takes a lot more cognitive resources. I have to sit here and actually look at it. I can't just passively receive that information and kind of absorb it and move on. I have to pause, read it, actually look at each of the letters and make sure I got them correctly. And that's kind of what our kids are doing when they're listening in a poor acoustic environment. They really are using a lot more cognitive resources to just receive the message, forget actually comprehending and then learning that information. So I think this is, kind of a nice visual example of what we're talking about here. And we want our students, regardless of their actual hearing levels, to have an experience like the first, line on this graphic. We want everything to be as clear as possible for them, kind of regardless of what's going on in the background. So we have lots of sources of noise in the classroom. There are sources of noise within the room itself. There's noise coming from outside the room. I'm sure you guys could have come up with some of these examples on your own. We have the kids that are, especially in the younger grades, moving around in their chairs. They're dragging them across the floor. They're standing up, they're sitting down, and all of that scraping of, metal chair legs on linoleum floors, just making noise, all day long. We have the HVAC systems that sound like a freight train sometimes in the side of the room, that it blows, super loud all year long. It doesn't matter if it's hot or cold out. We've got the computers with their fans running. We've got the projectors going. And now students typing on their laptops is a source of noise we didn't have really before, I think, like 2020. We didn't have as much ubiquitous Chromebook use as we do now. Even in first, second grade, kids are being given Chromebooks to start practicing working on. So all of that typing, again, click, 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 click. They're not loud individually, but you have 30 kids click, click, clicking at once, and it builds into a considerable amount of noise in the room. Pencil sharpeners, kids having side conversations, but even small group instruction. We want our kids to interact with each other. I know that is very much part of the teaching methodology that's being encouraged in this learning environment that we have now. And that's great. We want our students to learn from their peers, but at the same time, there's a lot more noise going in with that now, because we've got 7 different conversations happening at once in the classroom, because you've got little groups of 2 or 3 happening, versus just one person talking, the teacher at the front of the room giving instruction. So like I said, not to say these are bad things, causing noise, but they're just that it is what it is. They're there. So there are things to keep in mind when we can kind of control those situations to, try to keep the sound under control as much as possible. In the corner here on the bottom are just some factors that build and kind of go into classroom acoustics in general. So we're going to talk about noise. We're going to talk about reverberation today, which is a fancy word for echo. But there's also distance, how far you are away from the speaker. That can be an issue when you're a listener. The tech we're going to talk about tries to remove that problem. There's also directionality. If you're facing somebody versus facing the board when you're talking, that can impact how you sound to the listener. So lots of things going into the listening environment and making it optimal for our students, but today we're going to talk about how to deal with noise and reverberation. So we've got our issues that we can deal with within the classroom, and then there's lots of things happening outside our classroom that we cannot really control. If you are working in a school right on a main street, or your classroom is facing the main road, you've got cars, you've got the emergency personnel, ambulances, whatever going by. If you are in the back of the school and you face the playground, you've got that noise coming in from that side of the building. Kind of depends. It doesn't matter where your room faces. There's probably something happening outside being noisy at some point. If not the lawn mowing going on in front of the classrooms, if nothing else. But we also have noise coming in from the hallways. We have noise coming in from the air vents, like I said, the HVAC systems in the classrooms. If you're in a multi-store building, you might have classrooms above you that are like dropping things on the floor and causing noise in your room. If you are next to the band room, or you're next to the gym or the orchestra room, sound bleeds in from there. So I even had some schools that were more urban, under the Newark airport flight path, and they would get plane noise, especially on the fourth floor when the planes would go overhead. So a lot of this type of stuff we can't control, which is why when we can control the things happening in our room that make noise, it's as important to work on that as we can, because some of this is, I can't call up Newark Airport and ask them to switch where the planes are coming in from. So there's only so much we can do sometimes. In terms of sources of reverberation in a classroom, so like I said, that's the echo and the sound bouncing off all the surfaces in the room. If you've ever been in a room with very high ceilings, with hard floors, wood, linoleum, tile floors, if you've ever had a classroom where it was just like plaster on the walls or on the ceilings, and it doesn't have that drop ceiling with the acoustic tiling in it, or they don't have any like cork boards or anything on the wall, pushpin boards, all of those hard, flat surfaces are perfect opportunities for sound to hit and bounce off, and then go to the next wall and bounce off. And all of those bounces, those reflections, is the echo that we hear. Large windows as well. If you're in an older school building that tends to have those huge, almost floor-to-ceiling windows, if you have all the blinds up, which is great for light, but it's a huge flat surface for sound to be ping-ponging off of all day long. And again, some of these things we can't have no control over. You don't have any say in what your classroom looks like oftentimes, or what it was built out of in the 1950s when the building was created. So just things to keep in mind. If you feel like you're experiencing one of these issues in the room, you can look for these particular issues and see if maybe that's a potential source of why the room is feeling either really echoey or very noisy. Again, just things to consider. So like I said in the intro, I've been teaching teaching this topic at Montclair State Educational Audiology for several years now, and I use this picture every year in class with my students, and they are always very surprised by what looks like a pretty typical classroom, pre-K, kindergarten age, and all the potential issues that there are in this room. Usually I just show them the blank room with picture and say, okay, where are the things that might be problematic? How do you think this room sounds? And after we've gone over all these issues, by the end of it, they're like, oh my gosh, this room must be so difficult to listen in. So you can see here the different things that are pointed out. There's no area rugs, there's no soft surfaces on the floor, carpet tiles, what have you. So again, a nice flat, hard surface for sound to bounce up off of. Up on the walls, we have very high ceilings. So the high ceiling is a potential issue. And because the wall is so big, they only have cork boards on the bottom, and that's all you're going to reach, so it makes sense. But again, it can be another source of sound bouncing all over the place, the higher up you get on that wall. Nothing on the bottoms of the chair feet to try to keep down on that noise, like I said, of the students moving around. The doorway being open to the hallway, so whatever class is coming up and down the hall is potentially bleeding sound in. So some things we could control. We could ask admin to get area rugs. I've had a colleague that asked admin to get carpet tile for a room. We can ask them to get chair feet dampeners, and we'll look at actual examples of that particular thing that goes in the bottom of the chairs a little later. So like I said, some things we can adjust, some things, there's not much we can do as the frontline professionals to change how a room sounds or what it's made of. Some of those decisions have to come from much higher up if they're making big structural improvements to a room to try to reduce noise or reverberation. So ultimately, what does this mean for all of our students? We want our kids to have a good listening experience in the classroom. And the further you get away from the teacher in the room, the softer their voice is going to become naturally. That's just a property of physics. And what usually happens is the noise in the classroom is pretty steady. It doesn't really change. It doesn't matter if you're in the front or the back of the room. It's about the same level, regardless of where you are. But depending on where the student is compared to where the teacher is standing, that does change. The teacher's voice does get softer the farther away you are from her. So what we are trying to prevent from happening, particularly for our students with hearing loss, is you can see on this green line where the teacher's voice is getting softer and softer and softer. The background noise is the dotted gray line. There's a nice big gap between them at the start by the teacher, and the gap gets smaller and smaller and smaller the farther you get away from the teacher, to the point where the student in the back of the room, the teacher's voice is actually softer than the noise at that point. And that's not to say that the student in the back of the room isn't hearing anything. Again, it's just that it's more cognitively taxing to receive that information and understand what's being taught in class. So, we want our students that are sitting, regardless of where they're sitting in the room, to have a good listening experience. So we're trying to make sure everybody, for all of our kids with hearing loss, that it sounds like they're right in front of the teacher, kind of regardless of where they actually are placed in the classroom.
So what does it look like when the child is in the front or the child is at the back and they are not hearing super well? It's not just going to be your typical, what? I didn't understand. You're going to see behavior problems. You are going to see students not always following directions. Is it they weren't paying attention or they didn't hear you? Is it they didn't understand based on the background noise around? You might see incorrect assignments coming in, homework that's done differently than you had explained in class. Students looking at each other's work. Are they cheating or did they not hear the instructions and they're looking to a friend to try to see what's going on in the room? So it's not your typical what, responses when we're not understanding in class. What are other things that might cause this to happen other than just the room acoustics? There's a lot of factors that come into play that make this even harder. So children, particularly under the age of 15, they don't have the same neural pathways that we adapt to as we get older and that we, kind of form to be able to filter out the background noise as well as we can as an adult. So children under 15 are going to struggle in noise. Students with hearing loss of any kind, not just a traditional hearing loss, but something like they came in super stuffy with allergies, that's going to bother their hearing. Children with middle ear function problems. We've got swimmer's ear. We're just coming back from summer break. We've got seasonal allergies. We've got a friend that lived on a plane for the last month because they got to go everywhere during the summer months. Children with learning disabilities, dyslexia, ADHD, these are all factors that are going to put these children, they are more likely to have listening difficulties in the classroom. And it's oftentimes the students with many of these factors that are in the hardest listening environments. So we do a resource room for students with, let's say, dyslexia or other learning disabilities, and we give them half walls where there's 2 lessons going on either side. That's a lot of noise. So they're often in rooms that don't have the best acoustics because we try to give them a more one-on-one environment.
And maximizing space is always a problem in
Mhm.
school buildings.
Classroom space, prime real estate in this world. But the acoustics in the classroom are not just going to affect the kids, they're also going to affect our teachers and those who are trying to work with our students. This study that you can particularly see on the slide showed that 43% of teachers reported the need to reduce their teaching and their activities, given they were having vocal difficulties from, again, trying to speak over all this noise all day. Project your voice to those students that are in the back of the room, also next to the ventilation system. So we kind of see, yet again, this trickle-down effect of the acoustic problems we have in a classroom then lead to academic difficulties. This whole study has a whole bunch of bullet points of the problems that the teachers are facing beyond just the kids having a difficult time in the classroom. So then how do we fix it? How do we help give us at least a Band-Aid to start tackling the problems in the classroom? We start talking about what we call HAT equipment, hearing assistive technology. So this equipment is not just in classrooms. You can also find it in train stations. You can find it in movie theaters, in airports. But these are ways to help you hear in louder, busy places or get a message to you, whether it's auditorily, whether it's visual, whether it's some sort of alert system. So we can see a whole graph, and we're going to particularly focus on FM systems and hearing assistive tech that is for hearing aids, cochlear implants, and classroom systems. So it's important to mention, as based on the professionals that are in this room, we already know that hearing aids and cochlear implants do not equal normal hearing. Just because a student puts their hearing aids on that day and comes to class does not mean they are going to be able to hear you as well as their normal hearing peer next to them, behind them, in front of them. So though advancements have been made in technology, they're still going to struggle, particularly in background noise. We can do all the equipment adjustments that we can. This technology can keep getting better and better, but it's never going to be a perfect one-to-one comparison to a normal auditory system. So we start talking about personal HAT systems, which are currently the best solution to understanding speech in difficult listening environments. So we have educational systems and we have accessory systems. So an educational system is a one-to-many solution. So this could be one microphone transmitting to one student in the class, but also transmits to everyone else. So these are designed specifically with the classroom in mind, though they often look very similar to an accessory system, which is a one-to-one solution. If you get a new set of hearing aids and they give you this tiny little accessory that they say, you can use it as a microphone to talk to your kid in the back seat of the car, that's a fantastic accessory system. Not going to translate into the classroom. There are systems specifically made for the classroom. So they're for much, accessory systems are for much simpler listening environments. Your educational systems are designed to tackle those harder listening situations. And this is just a big breakdown of those systems. In terms of HAT equipment, we have personal systems, like I just mentioned. We have sound field systems, so a microphone to a speaker for the whole classroom. And then we have a personal sound field, so a speaker that, let's say, is on one student's desk projecting to that student. We don't see those very often, but they are around. They're not usually the option many of the kids have. But the big highlight on this chart I would like to mention is these. We didn't talk about SNR improvements, signal to noise, how much we talked about it a little, but not the full definitions. How much higher can we get the voice that we want to hear above the background noise in the room? We can see a much larger number when we use a personal system. We see 15 to 25 versus 2 to 5 in a sound field. Important to note, keep it in your brain. So when we go into these sound field systems, which is also known as a classroom auditory distribution system, they're designed to project the teacher's voice across the entire classroom. So it works well when you have one lesson in one room going on and you have one teacher projecting to a whole group of kids. And it can be set up by anyone. But the downsides to these is that it's not necessarily enough amplification for our kiddos with hearing loss. Remember, 2 to 5, 15 to 25. And it's not good in spaces with those half walls I was talking about. I imagine I have a bunch of classrooms that have those divided walls that you kind of wheel them around and you make new cubicles and you set up where you need to be for the day. When you have lessons going on in each side of those cubicles, you can't use a speaker like this because you're going to have your lesson here, there, and everywhere rather than to the students you're trying to speak with. So these are just a couple images of what you may stumble upon for a classroom auditory distribution system, which is too many words for me. So I say sound field. If you've ever seen one, this is what you might have stumbled upon. If you see one roll into your classroom, this is what we're looking at. Now you know what it is. And I like to drive home the same points. These are not typically the most ideal situation for our students with hearing loss, but we're going to tackle into that idea towards the end of this presentation. Because I say typically, not one or the other. And then these are some of those personal systems that you might see. These are your educational personal systems. One-to-many transmits directly to the student, connects directly with them, but can also be used for other students in the class, depending on how you set everything up. And these, though they have manufacturers on them, that's where we kind of decide what specifically, but there's different microphones and different situations for each type of hearing aid, type of cochlear implant, type of hearing loss, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, so we just went over some of like the big ticket, high tech technology that's going to, cost several $1,000s when we order it on the budget line. But there also are more low tech options that we can consider when we're trying to improve classroom acoustics and the listening ability for our students in the classroom. So keeping the windows and doors closed, easy thing to do. I know during COVID, everyone had to keep all the doors and everything open, but I think that time, hopefully, knock on wood, has passed us. If you know you have a really loud HVAC system, I've had schools where they have been able to fix them or put some type of like baffling or foam or something inside of the big metal cabinet that it sits in to try to absorb some of that sound if it's vibration that's really, because the system's just shaking. Keeping that noise from happening as much as possible. Using something like a Yacker tracker device, so we'll look at that on another slide. But that helps you kind of monitor student voice levels and let the kids also monitor themselves and try to keep the noise down to like a prescribed level that you're looking for. Getting chair feet covers. Like I said, we can have schools order something called fuzzy feet or hush ups. There's different companies that make the same concept. They look different. One looks like a tennis ball. The one here on the slide looks kind of like an X, and it kind of clamps under the bottom of the feet of the chair. It all kind of depends on what kind of chairs you have in your classroom and all of that. But they have fabric on the bottom or felt, and it just helps the chair glide without making all that scraping noise that they often do. We can use hack if we have it to raise the level of the teacher's voice directly to our students. And we can also add soft surfaces. So I've spoken with schools to get, large area rugs for a classroom that, just had like a huge open floor plan. And multiple rugs. Sometimes I know we don't want to put rugs under like student desks because they drop things and it stains and they eat snack and it gets gross. But, in the areas where it makes sense, the more things, soft surfaces you can add, the more it's going to absorb sound. I've seen teachers where, and I hate to tell teachers to spend any money of their own on their classrooms. They spend enough. Should not be a requirement. But I have had teachers that kind of put up almost like little curtains on their windows. It was partially for aesthetics, but I was like, oh, that actually would help, kind of keep the sound from bouncing off your window panes during class. Encouraging turn taking, making sure the kids aren't, yelling out over each other. Good classroom management, also helps keep that noise level down as well. So, like I said, some more low tech, not necessarily free, but inexpensive or low tech options that we can consider and recommend depending on the situation. Oh, and one more thing I wanted to add about this, because I just saw a note on here. If the classroom environment is really echoey, oftentimes adding a speaker system to it isn't going to make that situation any better. Adding a sound field in a room where you're getting tons of sound bouncing around the classroom already is just putting more noise in there to move around. If you are going to do a sound field and there is an echo issue in the room, we also need to do something about that sound absorption to try to keep that from bouncing around the room. So I've had, had admin in the past be like, well, we'll just put, if the room doesn't sound good, we'll just put a speaker in there. Like, well, that's going to make it worse actually at this point until we address the actual reflections of sound that are happening. So this is examples of noise monitoring options. This stoplight looking device here is actually called a Yakka tracker. It is a physical stoplight you can buy, and you can set it to turn red, yellow, green at different sound levels that you want your classroom to stay at. So the teacher can decide if the classroom noise reaches 75 decibels, it's going to turn red. And, that's going to alert the students that they need to kind of bring it down. That it is pretty large from what I've seen on pictures of, but there also are digital versions of it. There's a website called Bouncy Balls that you can go to. It's free. You just like turn on the microphone on your computer, and you'll get these little like kind of ping pong balls that bounce around the screen based on the noise coming into the computer. And the louder the noise gets, the more things start bouncing. So the kids kind of like it because it's interesting. It's neat. A couple times you let them really go crazy and kind of send the balls everywhere to get it out of their system. And then, you can use it as a more classroom management tool. And you actually can have it shush them at a certain volume level too, if they exceed that. But I've also seen things in Class Dojo that were noise monitoring kind of extensions or apps that you could utilize. There's things in Chrome. There's two other links here, something that was made on Scratch that's a noise meter, column counter, lots of different options, depending on your preferences. And captioning technology. So AI is just getting better and better, for better or worse. In this day and age, there are speech to text captioning services that are available. Schools can choose to subscribe to them. And they are either AI based, or there are some that have an AI base, but like a human person monitoring the AI to make sure it actually makes sense what's coming up on the screen. So there's different companies that, like I said, schools can contract with. There's one called Interact AS, Ava, is a company that has human monitored captioning available. Usually the AI version is cheaper. When you have somebody watching it, it gets more expensive. Microsoft Translate also can be used as a captioning service if you want to use it in that method. It's meant to translate language from one language to another, but there's no reason to say you can't both have yours set on English and just have it, take your voice and just print English on the next, on the student's screen. So those are like live speech to text options. There also is captioned media. So if we are showing videos to our students where they are being expected to absorb that information, to learn that information, to produce it later for tests or, content, we need to be providing them accessible media. So we either need to be using videos that are closed captioned, intentionally. Someone sat there and did all the captioning, in the past. Most YouTube videos now do have closed captioning available. It's AI closed captioning. It is much better. It used to be like scary, some of the things that would pop up on the AI captioning on YouTube. And I always told people you need to preview it before you show it to students, because there was some wild stuff that came up, sometimes that it thought you said one thing and it wrote something very inappropriate for school. Now I think it's a little bit, better than it was a few years ago. But there's also something called the Described and Captioned Media Program, the dcmp.org website. So you can go on there and look for a content area. If you're an English teacher, if you're a science teacher, I want to teach about the water cycle today. You can go on there and it's everything in that media library is already pre-captioned and available for use. So that's a good resource if you're looking, to update videos you might have been using that weren't really great in terms of accessibility in the past. Also keeping in mind the audio quality of the videos that you're showing. I've had some that sounded like they were recorded in a tin can, and it's hard for people with typical hearing to understand what those people are saying, let alone somebody with a hearing loss. And remember, recorded speech is always more difficult to listen to with a hearing loss than a live person talking. So, you just want to keep that in mind. If there's lots of background music or recording technology was used, maybe you want to look for something else, because that might not really be accessible to the student.
So we looked at photos of a bunch of different HAT equipment. We just talked about a whole bunch of captioning services and other communication accessibility things, but how do we know what's needed for each student? And the overall answer is that even though every professional that will see a student has their own lane of knowledge and input into this student, a collaborative team effort is always going to be the most beneficial for these students. I can speak from my end that as an itinerant educational audiologist, my office is my car. I am constantly on the road. I don't get to spend a full school day with each student. I don't get to know their personalities as well as somebody else who gets to see them an hour a day, 45 minutes every other day. So having that team effort, you're really going to be able to see who this student is, both socially, academically, personality-wise, where their strengths and weaknesses fall, and what communication tools would be best for them. So making sure that when you're watching a student, always give your input. When you come to these meetings and everybody's talking about things, even if it's just an auditory access kind of thing, if you're like, hey, I kind of noticed this, or maybe that doesn't really fit his personality well, is that when we have these team meetings, that's why I always beg to come to the team meetings. I don't often get invited, but we all kind of come together and you can build the pieces of the puzzle of who the student is and figure out what works best for them. Because not every student is going to be open arms welcoming to every piece of technology. Not every student, I could look at a piece of paper and say this technology would be the best option, and his classroom schedule doesn't allow for such a, piece of equipment, or he's not going to embrace taking something from room to room and we have to modify. So really keeping in mind that even if audiology is not your end, you have a piece to the puzzle to bring to the table to figure out what this student needs auditorily, if that makes sense. I feel like I'm talking in circles. I'm sorry. So in those lanes that everybody has their own lanes of their career path and what their knowledge strengths are. I spoke about this a little bit at Nagisha, and I mentioned this more so that you guys have the fuel to the fire if you ever need it. I don't do this as a reprimanding slide. I do this as information to you because as educators, as educational professionals, you go into a school to educate and to provide for these students, and you want the best for these kids. And sometimes a different type of cascading effect, the trickle down from the administration, you end up in areas that you didn't expect to be in. And you're like, whoa, I started trying to help and now I've ended in a place that I'm not comfortable in anymore. So I give you these. This is the New Jersey Professional Scope of Practice, which tells you that FM fitting and deciding and implementing is within the scope of practice of an audiologist. They also had a bunch of mention of speech language pathology, which is why this is on that slide, but there's not any mention of it in the SLP scope of practice, according to New Jersey Department of Education. And I also included this link on the bottom, which is the New Jersey Education Specialized Programs for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. It has a lot of information on different PDFs, scope of practice, what the children have access to, where you can find the appropriate contacts. I also made sure I put this in case there's any families in the room that need information, need resources, things to reference. That website has a whole bunch of things that relates directly to New Jersey education. And this is a clip of the New Jersey Department of Education. This is a special education resource for scopes of practice in deaf education. And this just gives us a whole bunch of bullet points, one versus the other. This is the largest chunk in the PDF, which is also available on that website that was in the slide prior. So I just put these side by side so we can compare. And again, I just circled it from Nagisha that the fitting and implementation of HAT equipment falls to the audiologist. So I give this to you as fuel in case you as professionals in the school ever end up in an area that you don't want to be in because you were helping and it snowballed, and then we've ended up that you're buying and fitting equipment and you don't want to be there, and papers to bring to administration.
Right. And this was created in the fall of 2020, this past school year, put out by the Department of Ed. So this is now their, recommendations, their resource. It also had educational interpreting in there. It had teacher of the deaf, audiology, and speech pathology. I don't think there was anybody else in there. So, and it's a really great resource. It outlines all the different areas of expertise that each one of these professionals has. And you can even use it as saying, well, why do I need that person, that professional? Because I've got you. Like, I'm trained to do what I'm trained to do, and that person's trained what they're trained to do. So like Bethany said, just information for, getting the appropriate resources and professionals, to work with students. And that's not to say, like, I lean on the teachers of the deaf that I work with and the speech pathologists that I work with. Like, we are hand in hand, in terms of needing each other and helping each other out. And they are my eyes and ears. As Bethany said, I'm on the road a vast majority of the week. I don't see things, that happen in real time all the time. So I want their feedback. They ask me how to do something, I relay it to them. They, bring that and, implement it with the kid. We can do basic troubleshooting. Like it's not to say like this is ours and we're stomping our feet about it. It's just trying to make sure the kid is getting the right supports. And there's a lot of stuff that overlaps, and I'm very happy for the stuff that overlaps
Oh,
to
yes.
be worked on by other people, because we are one person and we are covering too many school districts. So we can't be everywhere at once. So we're very happy to work with, whoever is out there interested in helping. And we'll go over what the best ways are to help, and how to do that. So
This is where we go back to that couple slides ago where I was talking about that team effort and putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. It's exactly that. We all bring a little bit to the table. And at the end of the day, when we all work together and we all work on the same problems and we've got different pieces to the puzzle, that's the best way to have the student benefit. So as Dr. McMahon said, I rely heavily on my professionals that are in the school, my speech therapists, my teachers of the deaf, to help with all the equipment and all the things and tell me all about the kiddo's personality to make sure that we can support them in the most appropriate way when we're on the road.
Right. So that is it for us today. Like I said, there's a lot of technology out there. It is very dependent on what your student is wearing, what the other kids in their class might be wearing, and how those devices all work together or don't work together. So it's very hard to actually say like, oh, everybody should use this, because that's not true. It very much depends, like Bethany said, on the kid and the situation and their personalities. So, we presented kind of a variety of options, but you really need to get into the nitty gritty of a particular student to figure out exactly what is kind of the most appropriate for their particular needs. And that changes. What they needed in kindergarten isn't what they need in ninth grade too. So we're always trying to revisit, how we're approaching the kid. So, but thank you for listening.
Wonderful. Well, thanks to you both for all this really, really great information. I am going to go ahead and put the link for our evaluation form, but I do want, there was one question that was in the chat. So I did go ahead and put the evaluation link for anyone obviously live who would like PD hours. We're happy to give them to you, but we do need you to fill out the evaluation. So please go ahead and do that. So while people are doing that in our last few minutes here, there was a question from Kylie talking about, as a person who's only deaf in one ear, how often do people with hearing disabilities struggle in terms of words? And I was just wondering if you could give just a quick, answer to that.
If we're talking about kids with hearing loss with unilateral hearing,
It was at that time.
and assuming like deaf in one ear and normal in the other, different levels of all of that too. Kids who have unilateral hearing loss, there was some research showing they were 10 times more likely to repeat a grade than their typical hearing two-eared peers. And that's not to say 10 times more of a very small amount is still not a lot of kids necessarily, but it does make it much more difficult for the brain to filter out information, filter out background noise, filter out echoes, when there's only one ear that's participating in the listening. We really need both of our ears to make use of these very subtle cues that we don't realize we're using, but we are, to figure out what the speech is from the noise, where somebody's talking to us from, all kinds of acoustic things that we even as audiologists wish we could forget, because it wasn't fun to learn when we were in school. But if you're working with a unilateral hearing loss, they definitely are at a disadvantage for listening in the classroom.
And struggling with words per se, individually, maybe not so much, especially while they're little, you may not notice it as much. But as they get older, what I see often with my unilateral kids is those are the students that tire out the quickest. Those are the students that miss information. The bigger the class size gets, the more noise there is in the room. Those are our kids that often get overlooked if you don't notice right off the bat that they have a hearing loss in one ear, because speech might be normal, development was all normal, and then they come to school and they start struggling a little bit. It's usually like a first, second grade time frame. And that's where we kind of step in and try to give them clearer access so they don't have to fight so hard over the background noise and everything.
Mhm. Right, and you both had mentioned around that transition, right? So thinking about maybe at a younger age, there's one teacher in one classroom and maybe it's not as evident, but looking at some of those other behaviors, we know that behavior is communication. And so thinking about all those other pieces of the puzzle to, best support our students. Wonderful. Well, great. Well, thanks again to you both. Very much appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. There is the link for the evaluation form. Please do visit our website, atcenter@tcnj.edu, to find out about upcoming professional development events. We're going to have some webinars, some live events in this fall and then into the spring. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and have a great night. Take care.
Okay.